On October 28th, 2024, at 8:17 in the morning, Ray Lawson turned a 1997 Chevrolet C250 into the Reynolds County assessment lot, and the truck announced him before he got out. 287,000 miles sat on an odometer that had gone cloudy at the edges. Rust had eaten through both lower doors. Baling twine held the tailgate closed because the latch had broken 3 winters earlier and never made the repair list. The windshield carried a hairline crack that stopped just above the steering wheel like a drawn horizon. Ray stepped down in faded canvas overalls with 2 stitched knee patches, a green work shirt bleached by 40 summers, and mud-caked boots with cracked soles that looked older than half the tractors on dealer lots in southeast Missouri. Inside the county building, Denise Harlan sat behind a polished walnut desk with a new tablet dock and a framed continuing education certificate, dated 2023. Her pickup in the employee row was a 4-door half-ton, 2 years old, dealer package, chrome still bright under road dust. Ray had dealt with enough offices to recognize the pattern. Not personal, just procedural, fast, and tuned to a system that rewarded clean inputs and quick outputs. At a glance, he knew how he would scan in that system, like distress inventory. The file summary showed 212 acres in mixed hay and rotational grazing, 106 acres of timbered ridge, 1 aging farmhouse with a patched roof, 1 machinery line anchored by a 1978 John Deere 4440. The software field for equipment condition held 1 word: functional. Ray had lived long enough in counties like this one to understand the unofficial math. Newer iron suggested progress. Larger notes passed as strength. A man with faded clothes and an old truck was often treated as a holdout from a smaller era. He had watched that logic run through coffee shops and sale barns for decades, and he had stopped arguing with it a long time ago. He kept records instead. His 4440 was the first clue, if anyone had asked. In 2021, he rebuilt it himself. $3,180 for injection pump and fuel system work, $2,940 for transmission bearings and seals, $1,460 for hydraulic lines and couplers, $920 for cab glass and weather strip, and $900 in assorted machine shop invoices. Total parts and outside labor, $9,400. A comparable financed replacement priced at $186,000 at 8.2% over 7 years would have carried a monthly payment of about $2,916 and total paid near $244,944, not counting insurance differences and finance fees. Ray had spent 1 hard winter in the shop and kept the machine he already understood. That arithmetic did not show up in Denise's first pass. Her letter arrived 5 days later. Official total valuation, $90,000, with timbered acreage classified as low utility brush in the comparable set. Ray read it once, took a pencil, circled 3 omitted categories, and laid the letter at the right corner of his kitchen table, beside a stack of ledgers tied with cotton string. He did not call anybody that night. He heated soup, fed the dogs, and wrote 2 lines in his daily log. Appraisal received, worksheet requested. The reason for that calm lived 40 years behind him. In March of 1985, Ray stood beside his father near a lane gate and watched men staple lot numbers to equipment that had been in their family for 2 generations. His father had financed operating costs on variable terms during a run of low cattle prices, then saw interest reset above 17%. A note that had been barely serviceable became mathematically fatal. 140 acres went through auction in 6 hours. The house held for another season, then went too. Ray was 29, married, and already farming rented ground. He did not make a speech that day. He made a rule. No variable debt. No long notes on depreciating equipment. No purchase that required optimistic prices to survive. From 1986 forward, he built a framework that looked modest to neighbors and relentless to a ledger. In 1986, he bought 40 acres cash for $32,000 after a probate sale, with a per-acre cost of $800 and closing expenses of $1,240 paid from savings. In 1993, he added 60 acres at $54,000 cash, $900 per acre, after negotiating road access easement language that later increased utility value. In 2001, he bought a bankruptcy machinery lot for $18,700 and sold duplicate implements over 18 months for $11,240, dropping net equipment costs to $7,460 while keeping a drill, rake, and stock trailer. In 2009, he leased Creek Bottom pasture for $4,200 annually, then purchased it for $71,500 in 2012 when the owner retired, applying 3 years of saved rent equivalent into closing and fencing upgrades. In 2018, he sold feeder calves with a seasonal gross of $118,400, costs of $75,200, and a margin of $43,200 that went straight into Treasury notes. By December 2023, cash and short-term government holdings reached $612,400, and county records showed 0 bank liens on land or machinery. Ray had watched people reduce farms to paint condition and square footage. His own numbers told a different story. He did not out-earn everyone every year. He outlasted financing cycles. He protected downside, and upside accumulated as a byproduct. His living costs stayed deliberately narrow. Property tax averaged $6,880 yearly across all parcels after assessment adjustments. Insurance on buildings, liability, and vehicles ran $4,960. Utilities and propane averaged $3,420. Groceries, seed for garden rows, and freezer processing came to about $7,100. Clothing and boots, even with replacements, stayed under $700. Routine medical out-of-pocket averaged $2,900. Total baseline household spending sat near $25,960 before farm operating inputs, and he treated that number as a ceiling, not a suggestion. By the second week of November 2024, while the appraisal dispute moved slowly through county channels, Ray was still doing what had built the balance sheet in the first place. On Mondays, he checked auction postings before daylight. On Tuesdays, he walked fence and marked posts for winter reset. On Wednesdays, he ran the 4,440 long enough to keep seals wet and batteries healthy. On Thursdays, he updated cost per bale and gain per head sheets. On Fridays, he met the same 2 neighbors for coffee and listened more than he talked. His buying discipline looked almost stubborn from the outside. At a farm sale near Bunker, he purchased a used haybine for $3,400 that a dealer had listed in spring for $8,900. He spent $620 on guards, belts, and wobble box parts, then put up 640 bales the next season without one hired custom pass. At another auction, he bought 2 grain wagons at $1,050 each, replaced bearings and tires for $1,180 total, and avoided renting hauling capacity at harvest rates that had climbed above $165 per hour with Appraiser. When he needed welding, he bartered pasture clipping for labor with a local fabricator and settled differences in cash at month end. No tabs, no revolving accounts. People noticed the truck and the roof patch. They usually did not notice the absence of monthly principal and interest. In spring 2025, hay yields across the area dropped 28% after a dry stretch. Calf prices swung week to week, and farmers carrying variable notes felt pressure immediately. Ray's fixed loan obligations remained exactly what they had been for years. 0 principal, 0 interest. After supper one night, he wrote the next steps on a yellow legal pad and set it beside the appraisal letter. 6 binders, 3 mill bids, 1 phone call to make in open hearing. He underlined worksheet twice and closed the pad. What mattered to him was already plain. The old truck was real. The patched clothes were real. The modest house was real. So was the arithmetic underneath them. Denise Harlan had issued a number that treated hardwood inventory like brush and quietly placed his control of his own land structure at risk. Ray Lawson had not raised his voice. He had requested the worksheet, opened 42 years of records on the same kitchen table, and prepared to let documented value speak in the only language the county could not dismiss. He kept looking at the yellow legal pad for another minute, then pulled the first ledger free from the string and set it open under the kitchen light. The page was dated January 3rd, 1986, penciled dark and steady, with columns for cash in, cash out, and acres controlled. He added a new line at the bottom of the current page. County worksheet pickup, in person, 9 o'clock morning. Under that, he wrote copy fee estimate, $35. Then he shut the binder, rinsed the soup pot, and laid out the same faded shirt for the next day. At 8:52 the following morning, the Chevrolet rolled back into the county lot with the same rattle in the right rear leaf spring and the same twine across the tailgate. Ray parked between a late-model sport utility vehicle with dealer tint and Denise Harlan's polished pickup, then walked in carrying a legal envelope and 2 sharpened pencils. The clerk at records, Brandon Pike, glanced up, took in the patched overalls, and shifted to the slow voice offices use when they assume somebody may not understand forms. Brandon wore a pressed quarter zip with a stitched bank logo, bright watch face, and clean tan boots that had never stood in a muddy gate opening. Ray asked for the complete worksheet packet behind parcel assessment case number RC-24-10-447, plus comp selection notes and classification criteria. Brandon paused, looked at the screen, and said those packets usually were not helpful unless an attorney was involved. He quoted the copy charge as $42 and suggested Ray wait for scheduled review rather than spending money on paperwork that probably will not change the model. Ray slid 2 20s and 2 singles across the counter without comment. He signed the receipt, took the packet, and stood to the side reading page 1 while others came and went. By the time he reached page 6, his pencil had circled timber classification code, utility adjustment line, and comparable radius override. He folded the receipt into his shirt pocket like it mattered, because to him it did. Denise passed through the hallway 10 minutes later with a tablet in one hand and a stainless coffee tumbler in the other. She gave Ray a professional nod and told him the model relied on recent distressed pasture sales because they were clean data points in this market. Her tone stayed polite, but the message was clear. The number was modern, objective, and already settled. Ray held the worksheet open to line 23 and asked whether anyone had field-verified merchantable hardwood volume on the 106 ridge acres. Denise said timber was generally speculative unless under active contract. An active contract had not been listed on his prior filing. Ray thanked her for clarifying, folded the pages, and walked out into a thin, cold sun that made the rust on his truck look brighter than it was. On the drive home, he passed the dealership south of Ellington, where two new tractors sat angled toward the road with sale banners tied across the cabs. One sticker read $214,900 before attachments. The second was $229,400 with seasonal financing advertised at 7.6% for buyers who qualified. Ray did not slow. At 7.6% over 7 years, even a conservative payment schedule pushed annual cash requirement above $40,000 before fuel, maintenance, and insurance upgrades. He had worked that arithmetic too many times to feel tempted. A machine that needed high commodity prices every year was not equipment to him. It was exposure. Back at the table, he spread the worksheet beside his old books and moved through the numbers line by line. That movement pulled old seasons into the room again, not as nostalgia, but as source documents. In March of 1985, when his father's note reset above 17%, the bank officer did not shout and the auctioneer did not sneer. Nobody needed to. The math itself did the damage. Operating debt near $118,000 had been manageable, around 9% with careful livestock turns. But at 17.2%, the annual interest burden alone moved past $20,000. Two poor sale runs in 1 year ended the margin. 140 acres left in 6 hours. The tractors followed. Ray remembered his father's silence at the gate, hat in both hands, and remembered deciding that any plan requiring generous interest terms to survive was not a plan at all. He built his rule set from there, and he built it without ceremony. Cash first. Repair before replace. Land only when price and soil quality aligned, never because neighbors were expanding. He did not reject risk. He priced it. In 1986, his first independent purchase was 40 acres at $32,000, plus $1,240 closing costs, and $3,180 for perimeter fence and corner brace reset. Total initial outlay was $36,420. That parcel cleared net $4,600 in hay and grazing margin in year 1 and $6,150 in year 2 after reseeding a weak stand. By 1990, it had returned cumulative net $27,800, which meant the effective land basis had fallen below $9,000 without any bank participation. In 1993, he acquired 60 acres for $54,000 cash from a retiring owner who wanted a clean transfer instead of installments. Survey correction and deed work added $2,460. Ray spent another $5,900 over 3 years on lime, water line extension, and a used squeeze chute, bought at auction for $1,100. Gross carrying cost to full utility sat at $63,460. Average annual net from that tract across 1996 through 2000 reached $9,740, with weather variation and one bad hay year accounted for. 5-year net of $48,700 did not look dramatic to anybody scanning from a truck window. It looked decisive in a ledger. The machinery years told the same story in smaller pieces. In 2001, he bought a bankruptcy lot for $18,700. One 1978 John Deere 4440 with a tired hydraulic pump, one drill with worn openers, two wagons, one rake, and a stock trailer with cracked lights. He sold the duplicate rake and one wagon for $3,600 total, sold scrap from non-repairable pieces for $1,420, and recovered another $6,220 by moving an extra trailer to a cattle buyer near Salem. Net retained equipment costs dropped to $7,460. Over the next 8 years, that line replaced roughly $61,000 in custom hire charges he otherwise would have paid at going rates. No dealer brochure called it success. The annual totals did. By the first week of December 2024, he had pulled enough material to build an evidentiary run that could survive questions from people who never set boots in his timber. Binder 1 held deed history, easement language, and parcel maps. Binder 2 held soil classes, water access notes, and rotational grazing records. Binder 3 held 10-year hay yield logs with bale counts and moisture percentages. Binder 4 held equipment depreciation schedules and repair receipts, including the 440 rebuild line items down to gasket kits and machine shop labor. Binder 5 stayed open for timber data he had not ordered yet. Binder 6 was reserved for market proof, not opinion. He paused only once that afternoon when he found the 2012 entry from the Creek Bottom purchase. Lease payments had been $4,200 a year from 2009 through 2011, and he could have continued leasing. Instead, he bought the parcel at $71,500, paid $2,980 in closing and transfer costs, then added $8,640 in cross-fencing and water points over 2 seasons. Most neighbors told him he should finance and keep more cash liquid for expansion. He did the opposite, wrote checks, and accepted slower growth. By 2024, that creek bottom unit alone had generated enough controlled forage to reduce purchased feed by an average of $11,300 annually across dry years and good years combined. 12-year feed savings passed $135,000 against total acquisition and improvement cost near $83,120. That was his framework in one line. Own the input, lower recurring exposure. The same discipline governed his house and truck, and people often mistook that for struggle. The roof had 3 patched sections because 3 patches had worked. Full replacement quotes ran between $18,400 and $24,900, and no leak had reached interior framing. He chose yearly inspections and spot repair averaging $620. The Chevrolet got oil every 4,000 miles, transmission service every 30,000, and salvage yard parts when practical. In 2022, he spent $740 on brake lines, shocks, and 1 remanufactured starter, then drove through 2 full hay seasons without interruption. In his records, appearance was not a category, function was. 3 days later, he called a consulting forester in Poplar Bluff and scheduled a full cruise at $4,850, payment due in 2 installments. The first invoice was $2,425, due on site. Ray mailed a check that evening and wrote the transaction into both household and farm ledgers because he separated them even when both balances could cover either expense. He did not know whether Denise would accept outside forestry evidence without challenge. He knew only that if the county insisted on models, then he would bring inventory measured tree by tree and priced against real bids. That night, he ate at the same table where every major decision since 1986 had been written in pencil first and ink second. He added one final note beneath the 6-binder list: no speeches, documents only. Then he turned off the kitchen light and stepped onto the porch where the cold had sharpened. The truck sat under the yard lamp, rust bright at the doors, tailgate tied shut with twine, looking exactly like the version of him most people believed. Inside the house, stacked in order and cross-referenced to the page, sat the arithmetic that had kept him free for 42 years and was about to do it again. He stood there another minute, hands in overall pockets, then went back inside and opened Binder 5 to a blank divider tab marked Timber. The furnace clicked on. The dogs settled under the table. Ray sat down, drew the legal pad close again, and did what he always did when pressure came from outside. He rebuilt the whole argument from first principles, year by year, in pencil. 1986, 40 acres, $32,000 cash, $1,240 closing, $3,180 fence reset, total basis $36,420. 1987, hay and grazing net $5,380, all retained. 1988, culvert and lane gravel $2,140, avoided spring access loss estimated at $1,100 per wet year. 1989, used sickle mower $900 cash, replaced a custom hire line that had been running $2,600 per season. 1990, cumulative retained earnings from first parcel crossed $27,800. 1991, no land bought, cash held through weak calf prices, average sale price down near 11% from prior year. 1992, Treasury bills purchased $12,000. Laddered short term, risk kept low, liquidity preserved. He turned the page and kept moving without drama. In 1993, he bought the 60-acre tract for $54,000 cash and paid $2,460 in survey and deed correction costs. In 1994, he spent $2,300 on lime and reseeding, then another $1,980 in 1995 on waterline extension. The tract's 3-year average net by 1997 was $8,920 annually, with one weather-damaged cutting included. In 1998, he passed on a finance planter package priced at $38,500 because the note offered only 2 years fixed before floating. In 1999, he bought a used planter at auction for $4,600, put $740 into chains and opener discs, and ran it for 8 seasons. By the time he reached the early 2000s, his entries were so regular they read like metronome beats. In 2001, bankruptcy machinery lot at $18,700. In 2002, sold duplicates and scrap, recovered $11,240. In 2003, net retained equipment basis, $7,460. In 2004, annual custom hire savings estimated $6,800. In 2005, emergency vet and feed spike year, still no notes opened. In 2006, pasture improvement $3,260. Carrying capacity increased by 14 cow-calf pairs seasonally. In 2007, conservative market year, cash reserves reached $148,000. In 2008, input costs jumped and many neighbors financed fertilizer on revolving paper above 9%. Ray purchased smaller volume cash, reduced acres under highest input load, and preserved margin. A primary consideration in his framework was not maximizing any single year. It was preserving optionality when prices broke in the wrong direction. So in 2009, when he leased creek bottom ground for $4,200, he treated the lease as a trial and logged forage response monthly. In 2010 and 2011, he repeated the lease, then bought the parcel in 2012 for $71,500 plus $2,980 in transfer costs. Improvement spending over 2 seasons totaled $8,640. Total committed, $83,120. Average annual feed cost reduction over the next 12 years, $11,300. Cumulative avoided feed purchases, about $135,600. Net structural benefit, before any appreciation, about $52,480. He wrote the next sequence as a block because it mattered to the hearing narrative. 2013. No major capital purchases. Cash reserves, $244,000. 2014. Rebuilt barn truss sections, $6,200. Extended service life at least 15 years versus replacement quotes above $48,000. 2015. Retained calf margin, $27,400 after feed and mineral. 2016. Bought no land despite 2 financed expansion offers from brokers. 2017. Short-term government holdings and cash. Combined $2,300. 2018. Feeder calf gross, $118,400. Cost $75,200. Margin $43,200. Moved to Treasury notes. 2019. Selective cull strategy reduced winter feed burden by 9%. 2020. Volatile sale barn spreads, no debt exposure, preserved cash. 2021. John Deere 4440 rebuild, $9,400. Total parts and machine work. 2022. Truck repairs, $740, no interruption to hay season. 2023, cash and short-term holdings, $612,400, bank liens, 0. If you want to see whether that ledger held up once the county board started asking hard questions, subscribe now, because the next phase turns on one phone call and one number no one in that room expected. He did not leave the table after writing that progression. He added 2 more columns: financed alternative cost and avoided interest. On the tractor decision alone, financed replacement at $186,000 and 8.2% over 7 years implied total payout near $244,944. His rebuild cost was $9,400. Difference, $235,544. Even if a critic discounted that by half for downtime risk and fuel efficiency differences, the gap stayed above $117,000. On the Creek Bottom purchase, if financed at 6.9% over 15 years, total payout on principal and interest would have been about $116,055 before improvements. His cash purchase plus improvements was $83,120. Difference, $32,935. Add tax and insurance drift, and the financed path widened further. By the 3rd week of December 2024, he had built a conservative net worth schedule suitable for public record review. Open acreage estimate at $3,950 per acre across 212 acres, $837,400. Timbered ridge not yet cruised. Provisional placeholder only. House and outbuildings, functional value estimate $96,000, with deferred cosmetic maintenance acknowledged. Equipment line, conservative resale $84,500. Cash and short-term holdings, $612,400. Less liabilities, 0 secured debt, 0 machinery notes, only ordinary payables inside 30 days. Even before the timber cruise, the structure was not a distressed $90,000 operation. It was a low-leverage farm with multiple liquid buffers. The resulting tension in Reynolds County was that Ray's ledger discipline was unusual, but not mysterious. Other farmers had discipline too. They simply worked under a different paradigm, one that rewarded scale while rates stayed gentle, and punished it when the cycle reversed. Dale Whitcomb was one of the best haymen in the county and had been for years. In 2021, Dale financed a combine package at 7.9%, principal near $312,000, monthly payment around $4,640. In 2023, he refinanced operating debt when input costs surged, and the blended note moved to 11.4% variable. Debt service crossed $89,000 annually. Dale did not fail from laziness. He failed from timing and terms. By autumn 2024, he lost the farm at auction and took a maintenance job to keep health coverage. Marla Jensen's operation told a different version of the same arithmetic. She ran cattle and feed with sharp records and a good reputation, then carried $640,000 in variable notes through a feed spike that lifted ration costs more than 30% inside 18 months. Her lender offered extension, but at higher rate and stricter collateral triggers. She filed Chapter 12 to protect what she could, sold down herd size, and moved to a leaner model on reduced acreage. She was not reckless. She was overexposed to interest movement she could not control. Troy and Becca Noland were younger, energetic, and widely admired for work ethic. They leveraged land at about 82% loan to value when valuations were peaking, and 2 consecutive dry years cut carrying capacity. Gross receipts dropped while fixed payments stayed fixed. They sold equipment, then leased back what they needed, then sold more. By early 2025, they were still farming, but on far tighter margins and far less control. Victor Ruiz signed short-term machinery paper at 12.1% because he needed reliability during a narrow planting window. When calf prices softened and repair costs rose, he sold breeding stock at a loss to stay current on the note and protect his credit line. Ray never used those stories as a sermon. He logged them as context. Good people, hard workers, non-trivial pressure. The prevailing consensus had told each of them that moderate leverage was simply modern agriculture. For a long stretch, that was true enough. Then the weather bent, rates climbed, and moderate turned heavy all at once. In January 2025, the forester completed the first pass on the Lawson Ridge and flagged stand density above county assumptions. In February, supplementary plots confirmed merchantable volume well beyond brush classification thresholds. Ray paid the second $2,425 invoice on time and added every page to Binder 5, including species mix, diameter classes, extraction constraints, and conservative discounting assumptions. He requested 3 sealed bids from regional mills with phased harvest language to avoid ecological damage and preserve long-term stand value. 3 days passed before the first bid arrived. $398,000 gross, with transport terms attached. The second came at $421,500. The third, from the highest bidder, came at $436,200 with a 30-day standing offer contingent on verification. Ray clipped each envelope flap to its corresponding worksheet and filed all 3 under date tabs. By the second week of March 2025, the wider crisis was no longer theoretical. Hay yields across the area were already tracking down after poor moisture recharge and local suppliers posted price sheets that reflected both transport pressure and financing costs. Fertilizer quotes rose again. Diesel sat high enough that custom work rates climbed over $170 per hour in some cases. The state program clause tied to low appraisals remained active, which meant Denise's original 90,000 figure still carried legal consequences until corrected. That clause opened a predatory purchase option window for adjacent investors if an operation was administratively reclassified as non-viable. Ray's position through that window stayed narrow and controlled. Fixed obligations, zero principal, zero interest, operating inputs bought in tranches, cash only. Herd adjusted to forage reality early, not late. Machinery line old but paid for. Cash reserves intact. He was not insulated from drought. No one was. But drought, on a debt-free structure, looked like a margin problem. Drought on leveraged paper looked like a solvency problem. At coffee that Friday, Dale sat across from him and said, quiet as gravel, "I should have locked terms earlier." Ray nodded once and answered, "You did what looked right then." That was all. No lecture. No victory tone. Marla came in 10 minutes later to pick up a parts order and asked whether he thought timber bids counted as hard value in county hearings. Ray said, "Only if documented clean." She thanked him and left with a folder under her arm. By late March, hearing notices were posted. Denise would defend the model. Ray would present evidence. Brandon Pike at Records called to confirm submission deadlines and told him, in a different voice than before, that all 6 binders had been logged and indexed for board review. External contacts resolved one by one, exactly as Ray preferred. Filed, stamped, acknowledged. On the evening before the hearing packet closed, Ray made one more entry at the bottom of his legal pad. If drought deepens, reduce summer carry by 12 head. Protect grass, protect cash, protect options. Then he capped the pencil, shut binder 6, and looked through the kitchen window at the truck under the yard light. Rust bright, tailgate tied with twine, parked beside a farm the county still had not learned how to read. The porch light clicked off at 9:14, and Ray carried Bender 5 to the truck so he would not forget it at daylight. He set it on the passenger seat beside Bender 6, tightened the twine on the tailgate once, and went back in without looking at the road. At 5:32 the next morning, he was up, coffee poured into a steel thermos, hearing copies stacked in 2 cardboard file boxes with colored tabs facing forward. He wore the same patched overalls, the same bleached shirt, and a clean cap with a torn bill edge that he had stitched by hand in 2019. By 8:41, the Reynolds County hearing room was half full, with 3 board members, 2 clerks, Denise Harlan at the front table, and Brandon Pike along the side wall with a laptop open to the parcel file. Ray came in carrying both boxes, set them down carefully, and asked for a power strip so he could run his old projector. No flourish, no opening statement. He put the 6 binders in a straight line from deed history through market bids, then stood with both hands on the table and waited for procedure. Denise delivered first. She walked through model logic, distressed comparables, and weighted averaging inside a 10-mile radius. Her tone was professional and steady. She repeated the $90,000 valuation as the current official figure pending review. One board member asked whether the timber category had been physically verified. Denise answered that no active harvest contract had been present at initial assessment, so wooded acreage had been assigned low utility brush weight under standard practice. Brandon typed without looking up. When Ray's turn came, he began with one sentence. "I am requesting correction by documented inventory." Then he opened Binder 5 to the cruise summary and read species, stand, and volume totals exactly as filed. 1,134 merchantable trees, estimated 588,000 board feet, conservative stumpage value, $412,760 after extraction discounting assumptions. He did not add adjectives. He gave page numbers. Denise asked whether bid letters were speculative indications rather than executable commitments. Ray nodded once, turned to Binder 6, and slid 3 sealed bid copies across the table with contact names, transport terms, and validity windows. The board chair asked if live verification was possible. Ray said yes, requested speaker authorization for the highest bidder, and read the number slowly from the tabbed page. The call connected on the second ring. Mill manager Curtis Lane identified himself, confirmed the bid amount of $436,200 for phase selective harvest, and confirmed a standing 30-day offer, contingent only on standard title and access verification. The room changed without noise. Brandon stopped typing for 2 seconds, then resumed faster. Denise took off her glasses, checked the worksheet screen, and asked for a 5-minute recess. The board granted 10. Ray stayed where he was and drank half a cup of cold coffee from the thermos. At 10:26, Denise returned with a revised packet. She stated on record that the initial model had omitted commercially significant timber assets, and that correction was required. She entered an amended official valuation of $1,142,000 with a defensible full property analysis showing $1,168,900 before house improvement adjustments. Brandon looked at Ray, then at the truck keys on the table, then back to the number on screen, as if trying to hold both images at once. One board member asked Ray whether he intended to refinance against the corrected value. Ray answered in 6 words. No refinancing. Same plan as before. He drove home with the amended paperwork clipped under Binder 1, parked in the same spot under the yard lamp, and fed the dogs before he sat down to draft timber terms that same evening, carrying the hearing corrections directly into contract language and note structure. He drove home with the amended paperwork clipped under Binder 1, parked in the same spot under the yard lamp, and fed the dogs before he sat down to draft timber terms. He rejected the top bid because it pushed extraction too fast on 2 steep sections, and accepted the middle bid of $421,500 with tighter seasonal access limits, selective cut spacing, and replanting obligations written in. Gross proceeds posted at closing as agreed. Tax withholding, consulting fees, and replanting commitments reduced net to $347,800. Ray moved $300,000 into a new ledger line titled Revolving Notes, 0 interest, county recorded. By the second week of May 2025, the first note papers were signed at his kitchen table with plain language and no penalty clauses. Dale Whitcomb's son, Aaron Whitcomb, received $40,000 for used hay equipment, a mower conditioner at $12,600, rake at $4,100, baler at $18,400, and $4,900 in repairs, belts, and pickup teeth. Repayment term was 60 months, no interest, first payment deferred 90 days, with one condition typed at the bottom. When repaid, fund the next family before any equipment upgrade. Marla Jensen came the following Tuesday with a notebook full of pasture maps and a cautious expression she had worn since filing Chapter 12. Ray issued $35,000 for perimeter cross-fencing, 2 frost-free water points, and lane stabilization so she could rotate smaller groups and reduce feed waste. Materials and hired labor quotes totaled $33,800. She kept $1,200 for contingency and sent receipts every month without being asked. By October, her winter feed purchase line was down 23% from the prior season. 3 days later, Troy and Becca Nolan sat side by side at the same table, hands folded, both exhausted from trying to hold payments together through dry years. Ray wrote a note for $28,000 designated for bred heifers purchased in 2 tranches to match forage recovery. $14,000 in June, $14,000 after first cutting numbers came in. They bought quality instead of volume, rebuilt slower, and protected cash flow. Their lender reduced pressure once operating margins stabilized across 2 quarters. Victor Ruiz arrived after supper, still in work clothes, cap in hand, carrying a list of machinery failures that had forced him into high-rate paper before. Ray gave him $25,000 for debt-free repairs and 1 strategic replacement: engine overhaul on the primary tractor, hydraulic pump and line renewal, and a used no-till drill purchased locally for $7,800 cash. Victor avoided signing another short-term note at 12.1% and kept breeding stock in place through the next cycle instead of liquidating again. The note pool mechanics were simple and rigid: 0 interest, verified use of funds, quarterly 1-page operating update, no refinancing of old consumer debt through farm notes. 1 covenant only: each borrower had to commit in writing to fund 1 future borrower after repayment crossed 80%. Ray was not building dependence. He was building relay discipline. By the first week of July 2025, Ray had logged every outflow, every receipt, and every repayment date into a separate binder section that mirrored county audit structure. He did that for one reason: if anyone ever challenged whether the timber money had been spent responsibly, he wanted the answer to be immediate and documented. Aaron Whitcomb submitted his first update with photos, hours logged, and cost per bale math showing custom hire avoidance of $9,600 in a single season. Marla's grazing chart showed rest periods extending from 14 days to 26 on key paddocks, with weight gain per head improving enough to offset lower herd count. The Nolans posted calf survival and feed conversion data that justified the staged heifer purchase approach. Victor's repair ledger showed downtime reduced by 40% compared with the prior year. Ray did not call these success stories. He called them operating results. By late August, he opened a fresh legal pad and ran the deeper arithmetic across his own operation and the 4 note recipients as one system. His personal framework from 1986 to 2025 showed cumulative avoided interest and financing costs of approximately $1,038,000 when compared with matched financed alternatives on land, machinery, and major improvements at then prevailing rates. Even if that estimate was cut by 30% for conservative bias, retained capital remained above $726,000. The timber correction had not created his stability. It had revealed it. Then he mapped multiplier effects. Initial note pool deployment totaled $128,000. Projected aggregate custom hire and finance cost avoidance among recipients over 5 years, based on documented first-year trends and conservative weather assumptions, came to roughly $294,000. If each family completed the covenant and relent at least $20,000 once, second cycle support would add $80,000 without new capital from Ray. At an average debt service avoidance rate near 8.7% equivalent, cumulative community-level retention crossed non-trivial territory fast. He built another year-by-year sequence and filed it behind the note contracts as a forecast schedule, clearly marked as projection only rather than posted ledger events. Ray's forecast schedule, projection only. 2025, note pool funded at $300,000. First disbursements, $128,000. Cash reserve after pool and operating buffers remained above $500,000. 2026, projected repayments received $24,600. New disbursements capped at received principal only. 2027, projected repayments, cumulative $58,400. Second cycle loans begin from recipient covenant. 2028, projected repayments, cumulative $93,700. For original borrowers near completion. 2029, projected repayments, cumulative $128,000. Original principal fully restored for reuse. 2030, estimated second cycle community loans active $80,000 to $120,000 depending on forage years. That sequence mattered because it proved the philosophy at full scale. Debt avoidance had first protected one farm. Then it converted hidden asset value into local resilience without bank leverage, without grant dependency, and without public ceremony. As September approached, Denise Harlan issued a protocol memo through her office requiring timber review on mixed farms above a threshold acreage before final valuation sign-off. She did not send Ray a letter. She did not need to. Brandon called to confirm the memo had been posted and said quietly that the office had already reopened 3 old files where wooded acreage might have been undervalued. External contact resolved. Ray ended that day where he had started the dispute months earlier. At the same kitchen table, under the same light, truck outside with rust under both doors and twine on the tailgate. He wrote 3 lines in the ledger before bed. Appraisal corrected. Timber converted to community notes, terms holding. Then he closed the book and set the pencil down exactly parallel to the page edge, because for 42 years he had trusted order over noise, and the numbers kept proving him right. He sat for another minute after setting the pencil down, then reached back to the ledger and added one more line under terms holding. First quarterly reviews due in 14 days. He checked each note file, clipped a blank payment log to the front of every folder, and set 4 stamped envelopes beside the lamp so no reminder would depend on memory. Outside, the yard went quiet except for wind in the ridge timber that had nearly been written off as brush, and inside the kitchen the system moved into its next phase, not with celebration, but with deadlines. By the end of September 2025, the first review packets came back in order. Aaron Whitcomb had put 1,184 bales through the used line he bought with the $40,000 note, and his cost sheet was precise. Fuel, twine, repairs, labor draw, and depreciation reserve totaled $19.80 per bale against local custom rates averaging $31.60. Net avoided expense over one season was $13,974 after repair overruns. He sent his first payment at $666.67, exactly on schedule, then added an extra $500 marked principal only. Dale Whitcomb, who had lost his own farm and now managed pasture for Aaron, wrote the cover note in block letters. Equipment paid for itself faster than expected. No boasting, just arithmetic. Marla Jensen's October packet carried grazing maps, scale tickets, and a 2-page feed comparison that could have passed any lender audit. The $35,000 note had gone where it was supposed to go. Cross-fencing, water points, lane stabilization. Her winter feed purchases fell from $92,400 in the prior cycle to $70,960, a drop of $21,400 $40. Vet costs eased as herd movement improved and stress events declined. Her first-year operating margin on the smaller herd landed at $38,700, and she sent quarterly payments of $1,458.33 without missing one date. She attached copies of each receipt, even though Ray never asked again. The Nolans moved slower, as planned. Their $28,000 note deployed in two $14,000 tranches, and they held the second purchase until forage numbers were real, not hoped for. By November, their bred heifer group had calved above county average, and the couple posted a cash flow sheet showing monthly obligations down 34% from their prior debt-heavy structure. They still worked long days. They still watched weather. But they had restored one thing debt had taken from them: decision time. Their first three payments were small, $388.89 each month. Then they sent a year-end principal reduction of $2,400 after calf sales cleared better than forecast. Victor Ruiz used the $25,000 exactly to plan, overhaul, hydraulic renewal, and a used no-till drill at $7,800 cash. Downtime during planning fell from 11 days the year before to 3. He kept breeding stock in place and avoided emergency liquidation, which mattered more than any single revenue line. His first annual summary showed finance charges reduced by $9,220 because he did not roll into another short-term machinery note. He paid monthly at $416.67 and included a handwritten line each quarter that became a quiet refrain. Still current. Still no new paper. If you are measuring this story by drama, this stretch may seem uneventful. If you are measuring it by outcomes, this was the hinge. By February 2026, the note pool had received $31,700 in combined repayments from the 4 borrowers, and Ray relent only from returned principal, exactly as the covenant required. The first second cycle loan went to a young operator Aaron identified through the county extension office, Leah Carter, for $20,000 to purchase used fencing supplies in a stock trailer after a storm season tore out her perimeter lines. The funds did not come from Ray directly. They came through Aaron's covenant account at 0 interest, with the same repayment discipline and the same requirement to pass it on. Relay discipline had started. By harvest 2026, multiplier effects were visible in county-level numbers. Across Aaron, Marla, the Nolans, Victor, and Leah, documented custom hire and finance cost avoidance totaled $86,940 for the year. Aggregate livestock loss rates dropped. Emergency refinancing requests among that small group dropped to 0. 2 families who had considered selling acreage stepped back from listing. One intervention had turned into 5 operating systems with lower fragility, and the effect was not theoretical anymore. It showed up in canceled finance applications, stabilized inventories, and on-time vendor payments. Let me stop here and ask you something. When people around you choose between appearance and cash flow, what do they usually reward first? Denise Harlan's resolution came in public paperwork first and in private conduct after. In March 2026, she presented revised mixed farm assessment protocol to the county board, adding mandatory timber screening above threshold acreage, field verification requirements, and a second review trigger when wooded parcels were classified below regional utility norms. She cited model error rates from reopened files, including 3 underassessed tracts and 1 overassessed tract, and asked for budget approval to contract periodic forestry review. The board approved the policy by unanimous vote. Her initial 90,000 figure remained in the archived file as amended, not erased, with correction notes attached. She did not attempt to recast herself as the hero of the revision. At a spring workshop in Poplar Bluff, she told two neighboring counties that her office had leaned too hard on distressed pasture comparables and had underweighted merchantable timber in mixed operations. Brandon Pike attended, took notes, and later handled records requests with a different posture than he had shown Ray that first morning. He became known for telling applicants, "Bring your documentation before assumptions set." In office culture terms, that was a meaningful shift. The dealership south of Ellington had its own quiet correction. The sales manager who once parked new tractors angled toward the highway, for effect began carrying a board of late-model used units and service life projections beside financing brochures. Not charity, not confession, adaptation. In a county where margins tightened and rate sensitivity became obvious, selling only the biggest note stopped working. By July 2026, Denise drove out to Lawson's place with a field tablet and a county intern for a training round on timber categorization. Ray walked them along two marked boundaries, showed old harvest maps against regrowth patterns, and answered questions in short lines. Measure first. Discount for extraction honestly. Do not price hope. That was all. No speech about being doubted, no demand for apology. At the gate, Denise thanked him for the records discipline and said the protocol change had already prevented one bad classification in another township. Ray nodded once and went back to mending a corner post. By the second week of October 2026, the roll call could be done without guesswork. Ray Lawson was 69, still in the same house with repaired patches instead of replacement, still driving the 1997 Chevrolet with the same tailgate twine, still carrying zero principal and zero interest obligations. His land remained intact under his own operating structure. Selective harvest regeneration checks showed acceptable survival rates, and the ridge held both value and future yield. Dale Whitcomb never recovered the original farm title, but he did not disappear. He worked pasture and logistics inside Aaron's operation, trained two younger hands on hay timing, and regained stable income without new debt pressure. Aaron Whitcomb remained current on his note, had paid back $18,000 by then, and had already relent $20,000 through covenant funds to Leah Carter, who was herself current and running profitable, small stock rotations on repaired perimeter lines. Marla Jensen completed her second full year on the restructured system with positive cash flow both years. Her note balance dropped below $12,000, and she crossed a benchmark that mattered more than pride. 12 straight months with no emergency operating credit. Troy and Becca Nolan reduced total liabilities to a level their revised acreage could support through below-average rainfall. Their note stood current, herd quality improved, and they remained together in the operation with a plan built on resilience rather than speed. Victor Ruiz restored his herd trajectory and replaced reactive borrowing with planned maintenance reserves. His note balance fell under $9,000, and he had not signed high-rate short-term machinery paper since Ray's funds came through. Leah Carter, first-second cycle recipient, fenced her boundaries, reduced livestock loss from strays, and projected full repayment in 42 months, after which she had committed to fund another starter loan. Denise Harlan remained county appraiser. Her office records now flagged mixed parcels for timber review by default and reopened assessments across 2 years, corrected enough classifications to alter tax equity for multiple farms, not just Ray's. Brandon Pike stayed in records, finished assessor certification coursework, and became the clerk who reminded people to request full worksheets early instead of late. Curtis Lane, the mill manager whose call had verified the hearing bid, completed the Lawson selective contract under terms as written, and later signed two smaller phased bids in the county under the updated review climate. His role in the story stayed what it had always been: market proof when proof was required. If you are learning something from this ledger-driven approach, pass it to someone who thinks discipline is old-fashioned. By spring 2027, the revolving pool had received enough repayments to issue two more second-cycle notes, each at $15,000, both funded from return principal rather than new capital from Ray. The pool total remained controlled. The covenant remained intact. Community retention from avoided finance charges and custom hire substitutions across active participants crossed $200,000 cumulative on documented figures. The math that once protected one family now buffered several, and every file had dates, receipts, and outcomes attached. Ray never changed the visual signals people used to judge him. He still showed up in worn canvas, still parked the rusted truck in clean lots, still wrote figures in pencil before ink. Yet by then, anyone who had read the county amendments or seen the repayment logs understood the deeper pattern. Wealth had never been hidden by trickery. It had been hidden by modesty, maintenance, and refusal to rent money for things that did not earn it back. For the final stretch, subscribe if you want more stories where arithmetic beats image. Then comment with one specific line item you would cut first to reduce financial fragility on a real farm budget. And share this with one person who mistakes shiny equipment for security, because the last image in Reynolds County was never a showroom photo. It was a porch light shutting off over a patched house, a ledger closed square on a kitchen table, and a 1997 Chevrolet C250 under the yard lamp with rust under both doors and baling twine on the tailgate. Past that truck sat 318 acres held without liens, a timber stand measured instead of guessed, a revolving zero-interest pool moving from one family to the next, and a county protocol rewritten because one man asked for the worksheet and brought documents. The appraiser had said $90,000. The timber alone proved $421,500 at harvest terms, and the whole property settled above $1 million on corrected analysis. Ray did not leverage the number into bigger notes. He converted it into options, then into local stability. That was the thesis, stripped clean. Appearance is noise, debt is weight, and discipline compounds quietly until it can carry more than one household. The morning after he wrote that final line, Ray opened binder 6 again and laid 4 repayment logs side by side under the kitchen light. At 7:03, Aaron Whitcomb knocked once, stepped in, and set down a cashier check for $9,200 marked principal. Dale came in behind him carrying a feed ledger and a coffee can full of fuel receipts sorted by month. Ray checked the amount, wrote the date in ink, and slid a second folder across the table with Leah Carter's covenant account statement attached. Aaron read the bottom line twice, then looked at his father and said, "Second loan is ready." Dale did not say much. He just rested one hand on the folder and nodded like a man setting weight down after carrying it too far. By the third week of November 2027, Marla Jensen sat in the same chair and unfolded a county map marked in pencil blocks of grazing rotation. Her note balance had dropped to $6,125. Her gross sales were smaller than before her debt crisis, but her net had become reliable. $44,380 for the year on lower input exposure, with purchased feed down another 11% because the fencing layout finally matched water access. She brought her final payment in two instruments, one electronic transfer confirmation and one check for $2,000, then asked Ray if she could direct her covenant funding to a widow north of Black who needed perimeter repair after storm damage. Ray answered in 4 words, "Document use, then send." She smiled once, short and tired and proud, and said, "I can do that." 3 days passed before Troy and Becca Noland arrived after dark with mud on both cuffs and a stack of calf sale tickets clipped to a yellow envelope. Their $28,000 note was not fully paid yet, but they had crossed the 80% covenant threshold with a year-end principal reduction of $5,900, bringing the remaining balance to $4,740. Becca spread a handwritten monthly cash flow across the table. No emergency borrowing in 14 months, feed variance inside planned range, and debt service as a share of gross income cut from 41% at their worst point to 16% on the rebuilt structure. Troy kept his eyes on the paper while he said, "I used to think bigger fixed everything." Ray capped his pen and answered, "Bigger magnifies. It does not fix." They left with a commitment form for their first pass-through loan, $15,000 to a beginning couple leasing 40 acres near Lesterville. By the first week of December 2027, Victor Ruiz came at supper hour with the old refrain still handwritten at the bottom of every quarterly sheet. Still current. Still no new paper. His original note balance had fallen to $3,350. The tractor overhaul he financed through Ray's Pool had run 2 full seasons with only routine service, and the used no-till drill had cut diesel and hired pass costs enough to keep annual machinery expense predictable. He set down his payment, then unfolded a second envelope with $1,500 designated for a tool grant to a young mechanic who had been helping 3 small farms avoid high-rate emergency repair loans. Ray logged both lines separately, 1 repayment and 1 covenant contribution, and asked one question: who verifies invoices? Victor already had the answer with a signed statement from the county extension office. If you trace the multiplier by strict arithmetic, the sequence remained unusually clean. Ray's initial pool allocation was $300,000. First cycle disbursements to Aaron, Marla, the Nolans, and Victor totaled $128,000. By December 2027, combined principal returned from those 4 notes stood at $109,985, and covenant-funded second cycle and third cycle loans issued from recipient accounts reached $96,500 across Leah Carter, the Lesterville lease couple, the storm-damaged widow Marla identified, and Victor's mechanic grant structure. Documented finance cost avoidance and custom hire substitution across all active participants, cumulative since pool launch, reached $312,740 on verified records. One corrected appraisal had become a local balance sheet shock absorber. The antagonist thread closed in a quieter room than the hearing room had been. On January 11th, 2028, County Council convened a short administrative session with Denise Harlan, Brandon Pike, and the adjacent investor who had filed notice under the low valuation purchase clause. His name was Glenn Partridge, owner of the parcel bordering Ray's Timber Ridge. Glenn had never shouted in public and never needed to. He had relied on paperwork timing. Denise entered the corrected valuation history. Brandon entered the amendment dates and timber verification documents, and Council entered a 1-page determination. The trigger condition had been invalidated retroactively by material appraisal error, rendering Glenn's option unenforceable. Glenn read it, folded it once, and asked whether appeal windows remained. Counsel gave him the date. Glenn filed no appeal. By the end of that month, he sold his option rights position to settle unrelated debt exposure and shifted his operation toward leased hunting acreage. He was not ruined. He was redirected by corrected records. The dealership resolution came in spring mud, not in speeches. The sales manager who had once angled new tractors toward the highway for visibility drove out in March 2028 to see whether Ray wanted trade figures on late model equipment. Ray showed him the 4440 meter, maintenance sheets, and annual hour logs. The machine had crossed another season with steady compression and no major hydraulic failures after the 2021 rebuild. The manager looked at the numbers a long time, then asked if he could copy Ray's maintenance interval template for other customers buying used units. Ray said yes and handed him a blank form. By summer, the dealership lot sign listed financed options on one side and cash flow tested used inventory on the other. They did not stop selling new. They stopped pretending finance new was the only respectable path. By late April 2028, Ray resolved the physical record trail the same way he had built it. He kept original ledgers, receipts, and the 6 hearing binders in a fire-rated cabinet bolted to the pantry wall. He delivered certified copies of the amended appraisal order, timber cruise summary, bid verification call transcript, and revolving note covenant template to the county archive, where Brandon logged each document with retrieval codes and cross-references to assessment case RC 2410447. The old projector he used in the hearing went to the extension office meeting room with a note taped to the handle. Works. Fan runs loud. He recycled empty legal pads, kept the used ones boxed by year, and marked the yellow pad from the dispute with 2 words across the top margin in red pencil. Worksheet first. By the second week of June 2028, the roll call could be done at one kitchen table, in one sitting, and every line could be checked. Ray Lawson was 72, still in the patched house, roof now repaired section by section, with documented costs rather than a full replacement note. The 1997 Chevrolet still carried rust below both doors, still wore the twine tailgate fix, and still started on the first turn most mornings. The windshield crack had not spread past the old horizon line. He remained debt-free. His land remained intact at 318 acres. Selective cut regeneration checks on the ridge met contract standards, and stand value remained an asset class the county now measured correctly. Denise Harlan remained county appraiser, and by then had trained 2 neighboring offices on mixed farm timber screening with field verification rules. Her initial error never disappeared from record, but neither did her correction. Brandon Pike completed assessor certification and became the clerk people asked for by name when they wanted full worksheets, comp notes, and classification codes before filing challenges. Dale Whitcomb never got his auction acreage back, but he regained stability, wage consistency, and professional standing as operations manager on Aaron's place. Aaron completed repayment in 2029, then funded 2 additional zero-interest notes through covenant terms and kept his machinery line debt-free except one short seasonal vendor account paid within 60 days. Marla Jensen paid off her note, issued her covenant loan, and posted 3 consecutive profitable years on a smaller herd with tighter control over feed risk. Troy and Becca Nolan finished repayment, maintained lower leverage, and expanded only after cash reserves crossed their own written threshold. Victor Ruiz closed his balance, kept breeding stock, and formalized his repair reserve so emergency rates no longer dictated his decisions. Leah Carter repaid on schedule and passed funds to another starter operation. Curtis Lane, the mill manager whose phone verification changed the hearing, retired in 2030 and told his replacement to bid phased cuts honestly or stay out of Reynolds County. No loaded look remained unresolved. Brandon eventually told Ray what had been on his face that first worksheet morning. He had assumed Ray would not understand the packet. He said it plainly in the archive room while handing back a stamped copy. Ray answered, "You changed the way you run the desk." Brandon said, "I did." That was enough for both of them. No unexplained pause remained in the file, and no flagged detail stayed dangling without an outcome. On an October evening in 2030, 6 years after the day the old Chevrolet rolled into the lot, Ray closed the ledger on the same table where this fight began and ran one finger down the last reconciled line. Revolving pool active, defaults 0, covenant loans continuing. The porch light clicked on. The dog shifted under the bench. Wind moved through a timber stand once called low utility brush, and now managed as measured capital. He stepped outside in worn canvas and looked at a yard that still offered no visual hint of what the books would show any auditor willing to read. That final image never needed polish. A patched house, a rusted truck with baling twine on the tailgate, a rebuilt 1978 tractor cooling under a shed roof, a fire-rated cabinet holding 6 binders and 40-plus years of ledgers. Across those pages sat the same distilled thesis he had lived without slogans. Appearance is noise, debt is weight, records are leverage, and discipline compounds until it can hold not only one farm, but a whole community's margin for error.